Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and
Rank.
once in a while, you could miss it.
Welcome into Adjust the Ranks. I am Jeremy Schulman at Adjust the Ranks at FF_Rebel on Twitter. I have a very special guest today. It is this man right here, Jeremy Popielarz, if I pronounced it correctly, from FTN, joining us for a rookie mock draft. We are doing a super flex, non-tight end premium, but PPR rookie mock draft. We're going to go 4 rounds of 12 teams here. We're going to talk about the prospects, see how we're doing things at this stage in the offseason, of course, after the combine, just before the NFL draft, and things start getting circulating with free agency as well. And of course, we had to invite one of the best in the business to do it. Jeremy, kind of going through all the ranks at FTN, Dynasty Analyst extraordinaire, someone who's been in these streets for as long as I've been on Twitter, which hasn't been too long, but has been a couple of years for sure. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us here. How you doing today?
I'm all right. It's a lovely Saturday in Buffalo, New York. It is actually 50 degrees for people that think it snows here all the time. We're almost out of the woods as far as that snow comes, but yes, I'm excited to talk some rookies. And I appreciate the very kind words leading into me. I don't know if I'd call myself an extraordinaire, but I do appreciate it. I try.
Listen, man.
I try my best. I'm a guide. I'm your guide to Dynasty.
I remember messaging you when I first got on Twitter just to kind of figure out your process and trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. And you were always just very open and very accepting of, giving your advice and hearing me out, even though I had no idea what was going on. So always appreciative to you of that. And I see your content always on the feed. It's always insightful. So if you're not an extraordinaire, few are, my man.
It's surprising you see it. I feel like Twitter, no one sees anything anymore. I really do. I just feel like I think people forget I exist, to be honest, at this point. It's just like I tweet things and I'm just like, I don't know if anybody can even see this. And then I see stuff from other people that I'm like, wait, I thought they left Twitter. I don't see them ever. So if you're on Twitter, make sure you keep cycling through. Also use lists. I've learned that's very good with the new algorithms that are in there. Making your own lists of people you like. I've learned that. That's really helpful as well. Another little tidbit, Jeremy tidbit, as far as using Twitter goes.
I already need to take notes because I don't know the first thing about lists, but I do know that when you have more than one Jeremy on a podcast, you are in the money. You are working in the green.
This is like we should play the lottery, to be honest. It's true. It's very rare to see 2 Jeremys in the same place at one time. I feel
very true, man. Very true.
Maybe I'm wrong.
But let's do this. As long as we're talking about kind of winning the lottery, let's spin the wheel here and figure out what we're doing at this rookie draft. So again, it is super flex. So of course, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, and the like are going to go earlier than kind of expected in when you're talking about a 1QB format. We are doing non-tight end premium. So we'll see those tight ends probably in the first round, but we'll see what happens there with some of those rookies. And then, we're going to also put a little wrinkle into this mock draft. And that wrinkle will be, how are we going to kind of try to build our team? Of course, we're in our specific position, but if if you've been playing Dynasty for more than 1 year, that you're constantly trading picks around. Sometimes you've won the league and you have the 102 and you're in a great spot. Sometimes you've come in last place and you also have the 112. So we need to figure out kind of what our strategy is here moving into the draft. And Jeremy, I will invite you to either choose to kind of spin first or to defer to me. Who would you prefer to figure out what our strategy is first?
I'll defer. It's a cool NFL way now, isn't it? When you win the coin toss, you get to defer. I'll roll with it.
Works. So let's find out what I am doing in this rookie draft. I am going best player available. So the guys that I think are best to fill my team, that's likely. Oh, and look, we got a little explosion of confetti here, but likely you're going best player available if you feel like you have a solid core and starters at every position. And you feel like your team is competitive, right? In most cases, best player available is the way to go. And I think we can have discussions about that as well. But certainly you want to be able to kind of accurately assess your dynasty roster and figure out exactly where you stand headed into the draft. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Cool. So since we've
We'll
done
talk more
that, I
about
will, yeah, we will. I will spin the wheel for you and we'll see where you land. All right. So that will be position needy. We don't need to go through all of this because we will give you a particular position where, look, we're not going to base the entire draft. We're not going to base the entire draft on this, but we're going to say you're going into your Superflex draft, Jeremy, position needy at quarterback. If you're like me, and
your
one of
program knows me. This is a problem. This is scary.
I have a team where I have Dak Prescott and Geno Smith, and the rest of my team is stacked. But Dak and Geno aren't necessarily going to get me to the promised land. I need to probably focus on quarterback at least in the next year or two, and see where we're going. So maybe it's Cam Ward, maybe it's Shadur Sanders if they come up. But you are going to be looking like you're in the same situation. Just taking a little extra longer look at quarterback. You need a quarterback to fill out your roster.
Yeah, and I feel like you kind of hit it when you're talking about the best player available. I think when it comes down to rookie drafts, you have to have the truthfulness to yourself. You can't lie to yourself. We can paint pretty pictures all day about anybody in the league if we really wanted to, but being brutally honest really helps you as a dynasty manager, knowing where your struggles are, where you need to make improvements, and how you can make those improvements, because everybody's different. I have leagues with kids that I've been in since high school, but they say aren't actively dynasty content creators or anything to that extent, and they really just check out. Like they check out, they come in when the rookie draft happens for like 3 weeks, then they check out and they come back when week 1 starts, and it's hard to rebuild or go say best player available and trade for positional needs. So that's that league. Like I know in that league, I can't do that. I have to draft more position needy. Like I'm going to be doing more so today. And then you have to be honest, like you said, you have Dak and Geno, and you can paint a pretty picture that Geno is going to now play with the Raiders for 2-3 seasons and give you viability moving forward. And even Dak, there's question marks. So you can paint these pretty pictures that they're not going anywhere and you have stability, but is it really stable? And then being honest and saying, well, maybe not. Maybe I should just forego the talent at, say, running back and get that early quarterback and make my dart swings later on the running backs, or however you want to go about that process. But I think being honest, like you mentioned there, and kind of truthfully assessing and knowing your league really goes a long way, no matter what format you're playing, especially in Dynasty, though, because some leagues, you'll see it all the time. General content, a trade for this player, trade this. But like, if you have managers who are absent or busy or just don't really check in, or sometimes trading's hard. It really is, because it comes down to values, and you may value Ashton Genty worth 3 first-round picks. Someone else might be like, well, I'm not paying 3 first-round picks for anybody. So, it makes trading hard at times. So just know your league, and that's the best advice I can give.
Yeah. 100%. And as I start this up, because the chat's getting a little rowdy here, we have 60 seconds per pick. But certainly, yes, totally agree. My strategy that I rolled is best player available. I'm looking to do that anyway, right? However, you do need to be conscious of what you have on your team. And if that sways you from a couple of guys who you have in the same tier, if you're considering, be it, an RJ Harvey at the back of the second, middle of third, depending on where he ultimately ends up, or who else is in that range? Maybe an Arroyo at tight end, right? Maybe a Milrow if he falls that far eventually, right? That's going to help you break ties, right? Mm-hmm. Really, we're not talking about going into any sort of draft with a set strategy that you can't change on the fly. What you need to do is just kind of envision where you'd like to go and see how the board falls. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like rookie drafts, there's a lot of wiggle room. At the day's end, I've had many of drafts where I'm almost in the same situation that I am today, where you're saying position need a quarterback. That's typically how I build my dynasty rosters. Like during startup drafts, I really focus in on wide receivers, tight ends, and like fill in the rest. So it's not uncommon for me to kind of go maybe hero quarterback in a super flex where I grab one of them early, hammer wide receivers, throw a tight end in there, throw some running backs, and kind of swing around with the Geno Smith, Derek Carrs. So I find myself often finding and needing, say, a quarterback, but I don't always go that route. Last year I was in a couple spots where I needed a quarterback. The quarterback went right before me, but I went with best player available because the value between the quarterback and the wide receiver or running back wasn't the same. Still in the same boat going into this year, but my team's stronger overall, and some of those teams have made the playoffs. Like they're playoff teams on regularity. My main missing piece is that quarterback still, but all I need to do is add a quarterback, and I have ultimately different routes, whether that's trades or if I can manage to go ahead and find one in one of these upcoming rookie drafts for me this year, at least.
For sure.
I guess I'm up already.
Yeah,
and
you're up.
This is where that conversation comes in, because you're in a tough spot. Cam Ward went at 1-2, and that's really the only quarterback that I absolutely love in this draft class. Just for the sake of this conversation and the fact that we said that I'm going to be quarterback needy, I am going to take Shedeur Sanders. I'm not overly in love with Shedeur Sanders here. I personally, if I was avoiding the positional need and the quarterback neediness, I would probably go running back here. So for everybody who's watching and listening, but I'm going to take Sanders here just on the basis and premise that we have built. And I do believe in Sanders. I think he's not necessarily an elevator. He's not going to elevate talent around him as much as like your Josh Allen, Joe Burrows, Patrick Mahomes, etc. But he can fall into that category that has been Kirk Cousins for the past few years, the Derek Carrs, Jared Goff. He can be a distributor, an above average distributor who can get the ball out, make some plays. Not going to really do a ton with his legs, but this class is full of players who really aren't. Even the ones that they're boasting as athletic movers, like really it's only Milrow. After that, you got guys that are more of that evader type of quality at the NFL level. Yes, they have good collegiate numbers, different game though. So I would say that Shedeur Sanders is fine here for me at 5 if I really needed a quarterback. And in Superflex, it's hard to come by. So this is probably your best shot. And sitting here and having 2-5, if I was like, say 2-2, like I may have passed on Cam Ward there, waited for the 2-2, which potentially could be Jackson Dart.
Yes.
And maybe played that game. But sitting in the middle of the second round, I don't think Jackson Dart would be there. So I'll go with Sanders here because after those three, I mean, you have some dart throws that I like late, but not something that I would be willing to say I'm filling that positional need at quarterback.
Well, that's an interesting question as well. Like Jackson Dart, I think, is the wild card in terms of where he goes in the NFL draft, where we're taking him in these rookie drafts. Where do you feel most comfortable at this moment taking Jackson Dart? And is that why, kind of as you alluded to, you took Shedeur Sanders here at the 105?
For me, quarterback and the process with quarterbacks for me really comes down to the NFL draft. You can turn on the tape, you can watch it as much as you want. But it's not necessarily getting in between the head of them, and their brain is being able to pick it. You can hear this, that, whatever coming out in reports, but we do see reports be misleading at times. So I'm not always, at this point, I have no real hardcore answer. My guess, though, is going to be 112 to 2-3. That's where I have him ranked over at FTN. In the top 50 Superflex rankings, he's at 11 for me at the moment. So 11 to 15 feels about right, depending on your league size. But that's just basically, all puns intended, throwing a dart and taking a guess. If he doesn't get decent draft capital, I'm just not going to draft him. I don't love Jackson Dart. I didn't love it through the process. It was really wild to me that he rose so high, but we see this all the time. He has some very good raw traits for sure. Do I think he's better than Milrow? Yes, I think he deserves to be the quarterback 3 for sure. But I do think that there's still a significant gap between Ward, Sanders, and him, and then the rest of the field. So if I see that he gets a good spot, maybe you push him up a little bit, but being super flex, you're probably looking at that area anyways for the third quarterback, especially in a class that's just loaded with the rest. So that's going to be his biggest issue for me, is just how deep the rest of the class is at other positions.
Yeah, very fair here. If we look at the first round here and how it shook out, I don't think we necessarily have a problem with the top 6 picks. Maybe you put Tyler Warren or your RB4 of choice instead of Shadur Sanders if you're just out on the guy. But mostly that's kind of how we're shaking out. What do you think of the back half of the first round with Judkins, Johnson, Warren, Egbuka, Burden, and Matthew Golden? Those last 2 names especially sneaking into the back end of the first. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of knock on this receiver class, which is rightfully so. I don't think that there's a plethora of elite options in there. I also don't think that they're as bad at the top end as people want to make it out to be. I also feel like the running backs are solid, but again, also I don't know if there's a ton of like elite level running backs. They may develop into that, but at this point in time, I think it's a lot closer. I like that back half of those 3. Those are well within the reaching points, especially with all the hype that Matthew Golden's getting. I haven't dove deep into Matthew Golden's tape yet. It's more of a surface level assessment at this point in time. So I am a little lower on him, but I really like him at 112. I just did an episode on the FTN Dynasty podcast with Pete Novo that he took him at 7. So, I mean, and we're seeing Daniel Jeremiah have him as the top receiver on his board in some of those big boards. So a lot of rise from Matthew Golden. So I think at 112 is huge value as far as the assessed value at this point in time. I'm still in on Luther Burden. I love Judkins at 1.7 there. What is that? 1.6? No, it's 1.7.
1.7,
and I would take him there. I absolutely love Quinshon Judkins. So I'm all in on that.
Nice.
Caleb Johnson as well. I like the profile. A little bit less on him. I probably wouldn't take him that high.
Right.
But it's just minor things with it. When what is a deep class? It's splitting hairs. And a lot of this stuff still right now, like you said, we have some hard evidence, but until you really get draft capital and situational basis, which some people like to overlook a lot, I still take some pretty good stock in it. Just because, yes, you can have the most talent in the world, but if you have the most talent paired with Justin Jefferson, you're not going to be stealing touches from Justin Jefferson. So, I still want to see some of that to concrete it, but yeah, I feel like that's the basic top 12, just in a different order.
I would agree with that. You're on the clock with about 37 seconds left, so I will let you sort through your pick, and I will sort through a few of our comments. We're saying, hello, what's going on to Jamie? How are you? Always draft for value and trade for need. This is what we try to do. We don't always get it right. We'll talk about that for sure. We have a third Jeremy in the house. And then this is an interesting question here as you go Devin Neal, who's another great running back. Let's talk first, though. We'll get into running backs for sure. But let's talk first about this rookie tight end class in general. We saw Tyler Warren. Again, this is non-tight end premium, and everybody knows that here. So Tyler Warren at the 109, Colston Loveland at the 203. How do you feel about those spots in non-TEP, and how do you feel about the class in general?
I still feel like tight end premium, with it or without it, bodes the question of why would we disvalue the tight ends? Like, I get there's a tight end premium, but every tight end gets a premium. So ultimately, all the tight end premium does is bridge a gap between your lower end flex players. Like, your Mike Gesicki might be more valuable than Andre Yoshevich. You know what I mean? Like you're talking about like wide receiver 3s and 4s where the tight ends are. You auto pick, by the way. And they
oh no.
The gap there doesn't really close at the top end. So for me, I think Tyler Warren, where he went, is very good. I haven't dove super deep into Tyler Warren's tapes. The surface level stuff is obviously tremendous, and I will probably have him as my tight end 1. But I really like Colston Loveland. I think Loveland's a lot closer than Tyler Warren. So as far as field goes about this class, I prefer Loveland where he will go. In the second round makes a lot more sense to me to go tight end than the first round. We've seen a lot of these first round tight ends not necessarily hit. And I think you're close enough in a gap between what could be and what is with Tyler Warren and Loveland to wait a little bit. I also think that this tight end class as a whole is fairly deep. I don't think you have the huge top end ceiling, but Scott, like I had mentioned, even with, just talking about Justin Jefferson as a quick reference, but the tight ends also, until you have draft capital, really is kind of useless again, because the main thing you're looking at for tight ends is opportunity and athleticism. So we know
Sure.
Warren has athleticism. We know Loveland does. We know Arreo does. We know Fannin does. We know Terrence Ferguson. Like it's a deep class, 100%. But unless they have the opportunity to be like the team's second or third target, they're just not going to be fantasy reliability there. Like it just isn't going to happen. We see that with so many tight ends that have good. Mike Gesicki's a big one. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's weeks he pops up, but like you're never trusting to start Mike Gesicki. Like you're not,
Right.
you know, just because he's not the main focal point in that offense. Why we love Travis Kelce, Evan Ingram, George Kittle, like they're the main target in their offenses, or at least the second target. You know, we saw that this past season with Sam Laporta. Rookie year, he was one of the main pieces because they were missing Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams comes in and basically kind of hits his stride, and Sam Laporta was very unreliable as far as a fantasy tight end goes. So without a pairing opportunity and athleticism, it's hard to really gauge like where to put him at this point in time. But as far as just raw talent goes, I think where they went in this draft, at least, is fair. But again, the whole class as a whole is a strong, it's deep. And I think we could see a couple good viable ones. It's just there's not that many spots out there for them to really land for reliability as far as fantasy goes.
For sure. And we see things like Evan Ingram get released. Yesterday, was it? We see Mike Gesicki get the bag 2 or 3 years at 37 mil like an hour or two ago. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the tight end landscape, because I think a lot of these teams they're playing reality football. We're here playing fantasy football. They're looking for things that go beyond what we're looking for. And so while we would love to see Isaiah Likely out there on, 90% of snaps, it's just not going to happen as long as Mark Andrews is on the team and healthy and playing. So, we don't see necessarily the usage that we always want to see from these guys. And like you said, Mike Gesicki, the Hunter Henrys of the world, these guys are great for their reality teams and they're out there, but are they helping you for fantasy? Not too much. If we look at the board here, and I think this leads into some of the other questions that we have going on right now. Jeremy, you picked Devin Neal at the 205. We have RJ Harvey, Samson, Scatabo, Ollie Gordon, Martinez, and Jordan James all off the board. What are you thinking about this? I don't know, let's call it third, fourth tier of running back in this rookie class. And, are you willing to take all of these backs this high in the second round of your drafts, or are you looking elsewhere?
Yes and no. I feel like this is going to be a class that you want to load up on them. But again, I believe a little bit more in the receiver group. I want to see draft capital for sure. But much like the tight ends we were talking about, there's not going to be that many opportunities for all these running backs. Like,
For sure.
The rooms are kind of clogged up to begin with as is. There are spots for sure, don't get me wrong. And will some of these guys take, journeyman running back twos on rosters jobs? Potentially, for sure. But when we're looking at it, this class is pretty deep at receiver, which is probably where I'm going to go here. I wouldn't say it's like high end deep, but there is some potential here. I'm going to pivot a little bit. I still like that Isaiah Bond is here, who just went right after my pick. But I feel like in that second round, I think they're all viable. Dylan Sampson, I'm a little bit less in on. RJ Harvey as well. Like, I get the allure of them. They're still a little undersized. It's still something that I have in general as the running back position goes, whether that's just me or not. There's a little bit of a bias, like you're really looking for running back ones and twos. These undersized guys don't always hit. They're just more of an outlier. That doesn't mean they can't, but they're an outlier. When they hit, they're an outlier. You have 5'9" guys. We're seeing a little bit of it with like Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, but those guys are like elite level athleticism. So when you're talking about like RJ Harvey or even Dylan Sampson, like they're not elite level athleticism. Like they're good, but it really bodes a question of, will they be big enough and be able to handle the rigors of an NFL season? Yeah. And are the NFL teams going to believe that they can, where you're falling into like the Hamptons, the Genties, the Judkins, the Johnsons, like Devin Neal, even Scatabo, Ollie Gordon's a little bigger, Damian Martinez. Like I like all of those players a little more than say Harvey or Sampson. But DJ Giddens, who just went, is an interesting name. Like there's a lot of interesting profiles as far as the running back class goes. And I'm fine taking him where it is because really the running backs are probably better than most of the wide receivers.
Sure.
But there are receivers that I would take probably before some of those players.
Yeah. And also we're seeing a little bit of the ADP kind of bite us in the butt. Jalen Knoll just going at the 312. That's probably far too late for him and all the hype that he's been getting lately. To be fair, if I saw his name on the list, I would have taken him over Restrepo. But that's where we stand right now in the offseason. We're just doing the best we can with the ADP here. Question for you, though, about these backs, because we hear it's a strong class. You referenced it, that some of the profiles of later guys are really nice. I won't call it a deep dive, but I did a semi-shallow dive a little bit into the last 8 draft classes just to look at running backs. And what I found was that after rounds 5, 6, and 7, when you're drafting those backs, the only person, can you guess who the only person to have a sustained fantasy relevant long career in the last 8 years, the only back to do that who was drafted?
Give me 1 second.
Yeah. Go for it.
1 second. I don't have that far back, but I can tell you.
I think
maybe.
it was
if it's been recent, maybe I have it.
2017.
No, I don't have that.
Yeah. It was Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is the one guy to have a sustained career here. And obviously, I think it was 5, 6, or 7. I know in that same class, Chris Carson was drafted in the 7th. Aaron Jones was either 5th or 6th. But yeah, so the interesting point I want to make is you have 26 seconds and you're picking Kyle McCord here. The interesting point that I found is that Aaron Jones is the only guy in the last 8 years, whether it be inefficient play, the fact that they just kind of fell out of the league after maybe one good season. He was the only guy in the last 8 years to be drafted in rounds 5, 6, or 7 to have that sustained career. If you go to UDFA, you get like an Austin Eckler here or there. You get kind of one other guy, but obviously the hit rates are pretty poor after round 5. And that's even in 2017, where we had 30 running backs drafted, which was the most in the last 8 years. So I just found that nugget interesting and wondering what you think about these later day 3 backs that get drafted, the Teutons, the Giddens, the Blues. How are you feeling about those guys if they go that late in the draft or their UDFAs?
Yeah, so similarly building off of what you said, if you look at since 2020, that's kind of where I started to really keep track of it in a more regularity of way. Like you said, you're not really seeing any late guys produce any total fantasy seasons. So the way that I look at it is in that totality of the season. And you're looking at top 50. Really, Rashad White's outside the top 50 is the only one that's had a couple back-to-backs. Ramondre Stevenson, I guess, was a late guy. He was 120 overall. He's had 3. Really, the only UDFAs, like you mentioned, since at least 2020 has been James Robinson.
Gus.
But you're not really seeing anybody exceed, Isaiah Pacheco, I guess, 251. Yep. He's pretty late. But again, for me, it really comes down to size and usually day 2. I try to avoid day 3. Sometimes I will if you're late in the draft and I will pick a running back over a wide receiver that doesn't really get good draft capital just because it's more likely they find their way into an opportunity at some point than the receiver will. So usually if you watch a lot of my drafts, 3, 4, 5 rounds, if they go that deep, will typically be running backs, unless there's a player I'm really in on. A few years ago, I was really in on Puka Nacua. So late, I was taking him. This year, I'm sure I could find somebody else, but it will really depend. If that late guy gets a really prime landing spot and they didn't take anybody else, or there's a guy that's in front of them that's really less than exciting, I'll take a shot, but we don't see it. Like you said, you don't see it. We can paint the pretty pictures and everything. The undersized backs, the late round guys, they just don't with regularity hit. When you're looking at So, like I said, since 2020, there's only sorry, I can't do quick math. 11 players who have had 3+ seasons of fantasy relevance, and some of them haven't been in the league that long. You've got Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, Rashad White, Ken Walker, Stevenson, Etienne, Javonte Williams, Chuba Hubbard, Antonio Gibson. Like, that's the group. Bijan Robinson and Gibbs will be there once they have another year probably to go, probably H-Chan, so there's other players who haven't had the opportunity to get to 3 just yet.
Right.
But you're really talking about, of that group, there's only 3 of them outside the top 50 picks, so it's not, yes, we can paint that pretty picture and say there's that chance. There's a chance for everything. I could win the lottery tonight. I don't know. But when you're looking at it and depending where your team is, sometimes that trust and stability is a little better of an option than taking a swing for the fences.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. So we wrapped up the draft here. Let's just take a look at the board. All right. We have in the 3rd round, we have Harold Fannin going to 301. I'm not sure that that's consensus anymore, but you do have to go out and get your guy. The production was absolutely crazy. Jordan James at the 302 is a bit spicy as well. And Quinn Ewers, I am all the way out on the 303. We see names like Jaden Higgins, Jack Besh, Tootin, of course, and then Jalen Knoll, guys who either had amazing production or an amazing combine. But then we also see names like Restrepo, Gunnar Helm, guys who have kind of been names in the past, Isaiah Bond, who didn't necessarily have put up the numbers that you want to see. But at the same token, you have to kind of consider these guys as, if they're drafted relatively where you expect them to go, if they're put in a good position in terms of landing spot, these could be guys that really do help your team. And I think none other than Tez Johnson is really the epitome of that idea. Tez did not do what we wanted to see him do in the combine. He's small and slow, but we've seen some small and slow guys succeed. I think it kind of just depends exactly what you're looking for. Maybe not this small, maybe not this slow, but it depends what you're looking for and what you're expecting. So do you see, my question to you then is, do you see, Jeremy, any universe where Isaiah Bond or Tez Johnson are fantasy relevant and you want to draft them?
Yeah, Tez Johnson, I'm a little bit way out on at this point.
Yeah.
I have him in the 30s in my rankings just because, so I mean, he's about where I have him ranked is where he went, but just undersized, not overly athletic as far as the 40 time went. The tape's really good, so that's probably what's still holding him there. Otherwise, I'd be completely out. But he's just like, he's the smallest, the small. He's smaller than Tank Dell, smaller than a lot of guys. And so I worry about that. If he lands in an interesting situation, maybe there's some. I think he can be a viable football option. The Tutu Atwell that we're seeing. Like maybe you'll have a week or two here, but he's probably never a guy you're going to trust to put in your lineup. So I'm like, yeah, I'm ranked in the 30s, but I'm likely passing on him in every rookie draft personally. I mean, again, that's at this point with no landing spot to really gauge. But there's other players around him that I'd rather have than Tez Johnson. Like I'm in on Pat Bryant. I still like Ricky White. Like there's a lot of even if I'm looking receiver, just staying in that receiver territory. Torrey Horton. Like, I mean, there's a lot of guys that didn't go here that I would rather take the shot on in what is a weaker running back or weaker wide receiver class. I'm going to go ahead and bank on some of those guys that had some good production as well as a solid draft. Like you just scrolled past Nick Nash. Like that's another guy I probably would have taken over Johnson. Like I just don't see there being consistent viability where these other guys potentially could have that. A little bit bigger receivers, a little bit more likely to find a more prominent role in an offense than Tez Johnson will.
For sure. Absolutely. And you're going to have that in every single draft. And really, you're just taking the shot on these 3rd or 4th rounds. You've probably heard it 100 times. These 3rd and 4th round picks are dart throws anyway. Just throw the dart on the guys that you like the best and you believe in, especially after you know where they land, if assuming that's when you're drafting. Hopefully that is. Otherwise, you're really just throwing these darts. Question for you here about your team. We said that we gave you the situation where you're quarterback needy in a super flex. So you went out and grabbed 2 of them. How do you feel about the guys that you selected and especially these 2 quarterbacks going into next year and then the future?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about Sanders when I took him. I don't want to dive too much more there, but I like the spot for it, needing him. As far as Kyle McCord goes, I think he's a really, really strong late round dart throw. We just saw him come out and set an ACC passing record this past season for Syracuse. He was over at Ohio State at one point, fairly high recruit. Like, there's a lot of intangibles about Kyle McCord that I could see him, getting decent draft capital and finding himself onto a football field for a starting position at some point. Really depends where he goes. Again, we'll have to see how this all folds out. But I could see him, if the Raiders pass on somebody early, maybe the Raiders take him late, he successes on Geno Smith, or maybe he goes to Seattle late and takes over for whoever Seattle brings in. Like there's a lot of options. I don't know if he becomes relevant in year one, but a guy that you can kind of sit a little bit on, and see how it goes.
Sure.
But that late, like you said, your quarterback needy, that was the position I was given. Super flex quarterbacks are the cheapest if they hit in rookie drafts. So at this point in time, I have him over Ewers and Howard. So I was happy to get him where I got him.
Nice.
And I just took the value there in saying, hey, I'm going to get two quarterbacks, but I'm not going to waste my prime picks on it. I'll take one of these late guys and hope it hits. If it doesn't, I'm no worse for the wear.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, let's see, who else do we have? Riley Leonard, Gabriel, Rourke. Someone who's not on this list is Shug. Is it Shug? Tyler Shug Show?
Oh, Show.
Whatever. Yeah, Show. So, I mean, he's potentially an option here as well. We'll have to see what happens in the NFL draft. But certainly, you could do a lot worse in a super flex draft than taking a shot on a quarterback late. Because, what else are you going to do? You're going to take Rashard Smith and hope he becomes some sort of Tyrone Tracy clone in the perfect position with nothing around him. You're
hoping that's
Williams,
Antonio Gibson more than anything.
Yeah, that's fair. Or one of these tight ends here who look good at the combine. You're really throwing a bunch of darts here. But with that in mind, Jeremy, the last question I have for you here is just looking at how the board fell in this particular draft. Again, we're still a little early in terms of ADP and offseason, but do you have, 1, 2, maybe 3 names that you like in terms of the value that people got here in this draft?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it before. I think the receivers go a little unloved here. I would say that probably most of the values that I really like are probably those. I like Jalen Noel, like you said, at the back of the third. Jalen Royals at 4-1 is extremely good value. Royals, I think, should be heads over heels ahead of, Restrepo, Beck, even Noel. There's a lot to like about Jalen Royals' game that people probably just don't know playing at Utah State. So the general public at this point in time probably doesn't really know. I think hopefully we see a little bit more of hype for him as it heads towards the NFL draft, but a physical guy that can kind of play almost every position that the receiver is going to be asked. Yeah, I mean, St. Brown for Jalen Noel, I don't hate that. He's a little bit stockier, slot type of receiver.
Sure.
I really like Jalen Noel's game. And then what he put on the combine was really nice as well. Yeah. I think he'll get drafted higher, and you're not going to get him at the back half of the third in your rookie drafts once May comes around. So I wouldn't count on that being there much longer. I think Tutton, Giddens is good value in this draft. I think those two will rise really high. By draft day. I don't know really high because it's a loaded class, but I could see them being more top of the third, late second, depending on where they go. Other than that, I feel like it's pretty chalk, to be honest.
Sure.
I don't know if there's much more real value. I think they're all pretty accurately selected.
Cool. Well, let's talk about this then. Because you threw a little RJ Harvey slander our way earlier, and that's totally fine. I get that. But Harvey and Dylan Sampson is some of the better tape that I've seen in terms of the way those guys run. However, yes, we're a little concerned about the size. We're a little concerned about the explosion, what they can do, especially Sampson in the receiving game, although he looked fine in drills. I'm considering RJ Harvey above Devin Neal. Devin Neal to me is a bit more of a kind of does everything very well. But is he elite in any one area versus RJ Harvey, who at least on tape appears to have that explosion? How do you feel about those two backs next to each other? And then, maybe anyone else who you find in that tier with Neal and Harvey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Devin Neal's a guy that I really like. I think that Devin Neal's game doesn't allure people.
Hmm.
He's a very methodical, smooth manipulator type of runner. Doesn't
Sure.
look fancy. Like it doesn't. He doesn't look like he's really doing much, but
Yeah.
like Devin Neal's a very good runner. He can change directions really fast. He's fine creating off of his direct target and making moves, subtle moves to get free, and then has the explosion to kind of house plenty of runs that he'll need to do at
Yeah.
the NFL level. He has a little bit more of that prototypical size, doesn't lean to the power side of the game, but he's not getting overpowered all of the time.
Agree.
So I think that there's an ability for him to be much like James Cook is, a very good interior runner just based on the quickness and lateral abilities to kind of move and limit the harder hits. We see that actually pretty heavy in this class, to be honest. Austin Genty does a lot of that. Actually, Cam Scadaboo does a lot of it, where they kind of are able to pivot their upper bodies and kind of sidestep players to remove that full on contact, which makes them a little bit of the undersized category, be able to be efficient interior runners. We saw that with Devon Achane coming out of Texas A&M. Like I said, James Cook does similarities to it as well. So I like Devin Neal. The issue for me with RJ Harvey is I haven't dove a ton into his tape, but I just don't the size, and that's what
Sure.
maybe it's a fault in my process, but I don't dive headfirst into players who are under that 5'10" threshold unless they're like legit. And I'm not saying RJ Harvey isn't legit, but he's going to be a later declare. He also is a little undersized, also at UCF. So we've seen that kind of like profile fade away at the NFL level.
Sure.
And my worry would be that he just doesn't have the size and the tools. Now, like you said, with Neal, he does everything well. That's a very good thing going to the NFL. You don't need to be elite at one thing. Being good at everything finds you opportunities, a la Tyler Algier. Let's be honest. Now, not that we want Devin Neal to be Algier, but I don't think RJ Harvey's like that. Oh, I'm elite at like say the burst and the explosion. Like he's not Jahmyr Gibbs. Let's be honest. Like he's just not. So you're not getting. I don't think you're going to have as much viability as you think. I do think he could be a viable football asset to a team, but you're really looking for consistency on a field. And I don't know if Harvey gets there. That's my same worry with Samson. Like I like Samson's tape. It just seems a little dull to me. I think he's a very patient runner. He's got good speed, good burst, but like doesn't really do anything overly exciting. Kind of leans on this like spin move. That's about all he's got to make
double
guys miss.
spin.
And like
double spin so much.
Yeah, it works at the college level, but I just don't know if that translates to really being for an undersized guy. I don't know if he's going to really find a viable role for us. But yeah, I think that group there, I think Damian Martinez is a good shot late, little undersized, but a good runner. I think he'll continue to rise. He just didn't get the love that you would have expected out of Miami. I think it's more so because Cam Ward stole the spotlight. But he was still a very efficient runner at Miami. And a lot of people were really in on him at Oregon State. So I still believe there. I think Ollie Gordon's the same. I think Ollie Gordon's going to be a good value. I know he's not exciting to a lot of people, but you see shades of that sophomore explosion that he had at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State was just struggling in general on offense this past year. Also, Gordon had some injuries. So I still see some shades of what we saw from when he put up that, what is it, over 15 or over, I think it was over 1,700 rushing yards as a sophomore. So I'm still in on those guys. So like, I'm taking Martinez or Gibson or Scadaboo over Samson, Harvey. Obviously not Neal because I took Neal, but I just personally don't allude to those undersized running backs. And again, maybe that's a process in mind, but it's not a total. Like Ashton Genty's still my top guy, and he's 5'8". And then you have like I was still in on Jahmyr Gibbs, who's 5'9". Like I mean, I'm not excluding them completely. It's just when they're undersized, they have to have extra for me to really love them. And again, I haven't dove into Harvey's tape completely, so maybe it's just still not there. I'll get to it here sooner than later. But I just, on the surface level at the moment, don't love Harvey that high. And I could be late to the party, like I said. Doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean I'm wrong. We'll see.
Hey, it doesn't mean any of us are right and wrong, man.
This is coming from a person who loved Tank Bigsby too, so I'll just discredit everybody who's listening. They'll be like, "Whoa."
Same, man. I I had far too
I'll
much
just say
faith.
it was good. It was a good second year. I'm just saying. Sometimes patience pays
There's
off.
a chance. There's a chance.
Always a chance.
Telling me there's a chance. So with undersized guys, TreVeyon Henderson, he's 5'10", not 5'9", but do you consider him undersized? And does that bump him down a little bit for you, behind Judkins and maybe Johnson?
Not behind Johnson. I prefer Judkins to Henderson. Because of that. Like it's not, he's not undersized. We see that profile often hit viable fantasy success, and what his role will probably be at the NFL level. I do think that he's going to be fine, because I can easily project what he's going to do. He's going to be a third down guy with a slight spelling in the first couple rounds. He'll get split touches. So really, honestly, Jahmyr Gibbs. Like if you were looking for Jahmyr Gibbs, like that's TreVeyon Henderson's role. Is he as explosive as him? Maybe not. Probably not as elusive, but still a very explosive runner. Good out of the backfield, a good pass blocker. So Henderson's pretty much your closest to Jahmyr Gibbs you're going to get in this class. So, but for me, I have Judkins over him because I think they're pretty close athletically, and based on size, I think Judkins could be more of a workhorse. That role is kind of evaporated from the NFL at this point in time. But if somebody was to get it, I feel like Judkins will get that opportunity before Henderson. So you're splitting hairs here, but they're the same player. Like I have Hampton, Judkins, and Henderson like right together. Right. It's just going to be draft capital and landing spot, and like to shift those guys around. They're basically the same player to me. So, but I just prefer Judkins, again, personal preference and just the size.
Awesome. And then last question I have for you before we wrap things up here is we talked a little bit about the back half of the first round, but if we look at the first 6 picks of the first round, I don't think we have necessarily, like you said, we could maybe order those back slightly differently, but specifically Tet McMillan and maybe even Cam Ward at the 102. How are you feeling about where these guys fall in relation to some of these backs in a super flex draft? Are you looking to push? Let's assume that what we're hearing is correct, that Omarion Hampton is drafted in the first round somewhere. That maybe Tet is even back of the first round, or at least, I guess, very early second round pick. And that, these backs kind of go where we expect them. Are you comfortable with Tet at the 102, 103, or are you looking at him behind Hampton, Henderson, Judkins, who you seem to like? Where do you like the order of those guys in the top half of the first?
So as it stands today, I actually have the receivers ahead of the running backs. And this is why. It's not necessarily talent based overall. We don't know the actual landing spots for the running backs. That's going to handle heavily in my process. Additionally, we don't know quarterback landing spots. We also don't know what Travis Hunter's doing. So there's a lot of wild cards at this current moment, but for me, and this is my process, this is what I tell everybody in the FTN Discord. This is what, if you ask me a question on Twitter, anything like that, like typically I lean to the wide receivers earlier in rookie drafts. Now, obviously, if you have a premier running back prospect, Bijan, potentially Ashton Genty, you have, your elite quarterbacks. Sure, we're taking those first in essence. But if I'm 1-2, 1-3, like my team's probably just bad. Like for a lack of better terms and being soft about it, like I'm not competing next year. I'm not competing 2 years from now, likely. Okay. You can obviously make big turnarounds by trading a lot of assets and moving picks and stuff like that. Sure. We can, again, make anything what we want it to be. But I lean to the receivers in Dynasty because we have a longer shelf life. Getting Tet McMillan, who could potentially be a top 12 asset for years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Like you might not be thinking that long, but like having Tet McMillan, who I could have viable for me and hitting his prime 3 years from now when my team's really ready to make a push, and he could be wide receiver 3 that season, as opposed to potentially Ashton Genty, who now is on year 3 of getting smacked every single play, potentially injuries, potentially about to come off a rookie contract. Like the philosophy for me is building through receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, fill in my running backs when the time is needed. If your team is pretty solid and you're at 1-2 because you ran into injury luck, different situation. Now I'm maybe looking at the wide receiver or the running backs. Like that's where it all comes down to. Like that's where rankings are hard to just draft solely off of. That's where you kind of have to have that assessment of your roster, know where you're going, your direction, and what of a plan that you have. It doesn't have to be set in stone, like you mentioned a little earlier. Fluidity always helps, but I'm fine with Tet McMillan where he went. Honestly, the top 3 is my order. I mean, I have McMillan over Ward until we know for sure. But it's Genty, McMillan, Ward. Those are my top 3. Spoiler alert in my rankings. So you got to pay for the rest. Sorry, but those 3,
Do it.
those 3 are that's my order. So I'm fine with it. The Hampton, Quinshon, Judkins, TreVeyon, Henderson are the back half for me at the moment. Travis Hunter probably should be a little lower in my rankings, but if he's playing receiver a majority of the time, I have him at 6. Like that's probably where I'll keep him, because if he's playing receiver for most of it, like he's probably arguably the best receiver. So
Right.
It's just what he's doing, which we should hopefully find out roughly on draft day. That's going to be your biggest dart throw, So I feel like where he went here at 2-1, maybe the back half of the first is where you'll see teams probably start to take a chance on him, because it is a risk. But if you're, the best team or the second best team in the league, you likely have a solid roster and you can afford to take that chance. And if it hits, boom, you're golden. Where the top teams, I'm like at 2-1, it's like, yeah, I get the swing, but like it's also a risky pick if your team's like really bad. Like it could be a wasted pick, and we don't want that, So it's a struggle, but again, I like McMillan, I like Ibuka, I like Luther Burden. I think that those 3, and then Matthew Golden as well. He's a little lower in my ranks, but those 3 I think deserve to be somewhere in the middle. And I think you can really, the whole top 10 here, I think you could, or 11, honestly, is the top 11 roughly, and you can interchange it however you choose based on team need and whatever.
And if just using this because he's the only one I can think of at the moment with a tick. But if Pete Carroll comes out and the Raiders draft Travis Hunter and he's chewing his gum and he's, we're going to use him at wide receiver. Some coach says, basically what we want to hear. We're not going to get snap counts. We're not going to get a real sense of how the team's going to use Hunter. But, if the team at least implies or outright says, yeah, he's going to play wide receiver for us, and we can, assume he's the wide receiver 3 on the team, he's coming in more than just sub packages. The hype gets out of control. Where do you think he's going to rise to? Where would you be comfortable taking him?
I mean, if they come out and say he's going to be primarily the receiver, he'll probably end up at like 1-3, 1-4, guaranteed. Yeah. Because you've had many people already say like he would be. The issue is we don't know.
Right.
We don't. There's some teams. I believe Cleveland was one who said that they would use him at receiver as opposed to corner. I believe it was Cleveland. Either that or it was Tennessee. One of those teams up near the top. Cleveland. They mentioned that they would probably view him more as a receiver than a corner. And we've had others who said he's more a corner than a receiver. So, like I said, we'll get some clarity. That's why right now I have him at like 6, 7, 8. Like that territory feels safe to me, because I do think that if we even get 50-50, 6, 7, 8 feels fair, because I think he'll make enough plays, like you said, in the packages to be somewhatly viable. And in games that he hits, 70% receiver, he'll likely be a wide receiver 1, potentially. Awesome. So
sweet. Well, we're going to wrap up here. We are Adjust the Ranks. I am Jeremy Schulman. At Adjust the Ranks, please follow us on YouTube. We're also presented by the Fantasy Football Universe. You can follow us on YouTube or on X or on TikTok. We're all over the place. And just as a means of quick promotion here, we have an amazing schedule in March and throughout the offseason. So if you stuck with us this far, you can see, obviously, Andrew Cooper was just on a few days ago. We had Jeremy here today. We got Pat Fitzmaurice and Derek Brown of Fantasy Bros. We got Kevin Coleman coming on at the end of the month, and a lot of other guests lined up throughout the offseason. So please, if you like this content, like and subscribe. We'd love to continue doing this all off season long. That's enough from me. Jeremy, why don't you tell the people where you are, where they can find your stuff? You mentioned what they can pay for in terms of your rankings. We'd love to hear about that as well. That will also be linked in the description, so you can get that all information all there too.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, that's a great list. I'm just saying. I'm squished between. I don't know if I deserve to necessarily be in that list. I appreciate it. This may be the week everybody took off. No. But yeah, Derek is going to be great. Coleman's going to be great. Pat's great. So that's a good lineup coming up. Make sure you guys do keep tuning in, because love all those guys. As far as my stuff goes, the Twitter's on the screen if you're watching it. If you're listening, it's Popes FFH. You pretty much get links to everything there. I am on Blue Sky as well if you are over there. And as far as the written and other content, it is all over at ftnfantasy.com. some stuff's free. I have free scouting reports over there on usually most of the players. I'm working through the top 50. I try to get through my top 50 to have all those up. And then the top 50 rankings, like I said, are behind the paywall, but you can subscribe there. Also my dynasty ranks, all of in-season ranks, all that other stuff. Definitely head on over, check it out. If you subscribe, you get all the good stuff. DVOA as well from Aaron Schatz. You can get Jeff Radcliffe's work. You can get the illustrious Laquan Jones is added. We added Kuda. We added a pretty big group of awesome, very good fantasy analysts here over the last month. So it is a good group of players. Wow, I guess you could call them players, right? Hey. Content creators. So depending on the package, you can get all of their work as well. So it's a good group. I'm excited moving forward. So again, check out ftnfantasy.com.
Awesome. So Jeremy, appreciate you having the time and making the time to come on. Thank you so much for this, Jeremy. I am this Jeremy. We appreciate everybody in the chat. We had a third Jeremy in the chat, but we got Jamie. We appreciate you and everyone else for tuning in. Thank you so much. And we will see you Wednesday. We got Pat Fitzmaurice coming up next. We'll see Dynasty, I think, Startup Mock. So until then, talk to you next time.
Adjust the Ranks is most obliged to your patronage. Should you wish to imbibe future content via your auditory and/or ocular cavities, do offer your clicks of approval and subscription.